Real quick, while we're waiting for a few folks to join us, just curious, how many of you are going to be presenting at the Summer Expo? Raise your hand. No one yet. Or you can put it in the chat if you have your camera off. Just curious how many are presenting in the virtual expo. We will also be, just so you know, we will be virtual this fall as well, based on the new schedule. Oh, okay, Hannah, thank you. Hannah's going to be presenting at the Summer Expo. Excellent.
Victoria will be too.
And Victoria, awesome. Fantastic. So we do have a slide in here at the end, and of course, if you have any questions specifically about the Summer Expo, feel free to ask away. You can put that in the chat. You can speak up. Neelu and I are happy to address some of those. We do have a couple slides that talk about it, but again, you know, we want to be here for the Summer Expo, which is coming up here in just a little bit, starting on the 20th. So. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I know we'll have a few people that will be joining us a little bit late. All right, so some people are asking about the deadline. So it's Friday at midnight. Now, I will tell you, I don't draw, you know, like a cutoff right at midnight. If it's a little bit after that, that's fine. Or if there was an issue with your internet and you need to turn it in on Saturday, no problem. We're still going to get you the opportunity to present, and we'll accept your abstract. So, but the standard is usually 11:59 on that Friday. So thank you for asking that. Yes, absolutely. All right. Any other quick questions on the Summer Expo? Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. So let's introduce ourselves. I know I recognize a lot of the same people who've been with us this whole summer, but once again, why don't you go ahead and advance the slide there, Neelu? So here I am. You got a more casual picture of me. But again, this is my information as well. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions about undergraduate research. So maybe you're curious about returning to research this fall, for example, or finding an experience in the fall or getting involved. Feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to help you in that process. But I'm the Assistant Director in the Office of Service Learning and Undergraduate Research. Been here about nearly 5 years now, so have some experience under my belt at this point with UAB. Go ahead and advance to the next slide, Neelu. And go ahead and introduce yourself. Oh, you're on.
About that.
There you go.
Hi, my name is Neelu Varghese. I'm a Vista in the Office of Service Learning and Undergraduate Research. If you have any questions about service learning or undergraduate research, I'm happy to help. And here's my email and phone number.
And also, Neelu did a lot of research as an undergrad. I will say that, and she'll talk a little bit about the virtual expo as well at the end. But she also was involved with Inquiro, which is the undergraduate research journal at UAB. So she's a great person to ask about that as well, and she can get you connected, as I can as well. But since she was an actual one of the board, one of the editors with that journal, she can answer those types of questions too. All right, next slide, please. All right, so last week we talked about poster presentations. And this week we're talking about an oral presentation or a research talk. So when you submit to the expo, you have those two options. You can either do a poster presentation or you can do an oral presentation. So we're talking about the second one here. But I will say there is some crossover in how you talk about your research, how you present yourself, especially in a virtual environment. So if you record yourself in Zoom, for example, for a poster presentation, people are still going to see you. They're going to hear you. So a lot of stuff that we're talking about today will still be applicable for a poster presentation as well. And if you're doing it in person, of course, your whole demeanor on how you present your research, your body language, all these sorts of things, the narrative that you tell, how you tell it, all a huge part of presenting a poster as well as a research talk. But as you can see on this slide, there is a way to kind of distinguish what a research talk is or an oral presentation. it is not just a lecture. It's not just you up there going on about your research. It's very focused. It's very specific. It's a story that you're telling, right? It's not us telling us about all of the research that you did and the experience that you had, but it's really about a story about the research that you've done. Okay, it's a way to get some feedback. One of the things that we're going to integrate into this summer virtual is we're going to improve, hopefully, some of the Q&A opportunities. We're going to have some live Zoom interactions. And, of course, when you give an oral presentation at an in-person conference, there's always a Q&A portion at the end of it. And you can get some good feedback during those, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Also, a poster has all of the data on there, and you're going to have a lot of the data in your slides as well. But very often, especially this summer, a lot of you are going to be doing kind of works in progress, and that's totally fine. You can just kind of walk us through where you are at that point, and then hopefully some future directions and what your conclusions are and those sorts of things. But that's one of the big differences. So it's not a lecture. It's not a deep dive. Again, you're giving us the basic information about what your research was, some of the data that supports it, and the way that you did the research, and some future directions after your conclusions. Next slide, please. All right, so here is a structure. So there's a lot of information on this, and we're going to break down each aspect of this. But this hourglass model is a really good model to use when you're presenting an oral presentation. So, and then we break it down here so we have a 15-minute talk. Basically, for like our expo, you have 10 to 12 minutes to present your information, present your research, and then we have a 3-minute Q&A. In the virtual world, the way we're going to have it, it'll probably be a little bit longer than 3 minutes if you do a live Q&A. But it's always good to just kind of plan out your presentation. We don't want it to go over 12 minutes. We want you to be concise and precise in how you present your information. So you can kind of see the breakdown of the slides here, and whether you're using PowerPoint or other types of Google Slides, whatever you may be using, it's good to have that understanding that each slide is equal to about a minute. Sometimes you can go over that depending on the information that's on it, but you usually think about, for a 10 to 12 minute talk, you're looking at about 10 to 12 slides. So this breaks down specifically how many slides you can use for each section. But again, this is just a suggestion. It's not, a requirement by any means. It's not something that the judges are going to be looking at and say, oh, wow, they had 6 slides on their methods, deduction. But this is a good way to help you focus, though, if you think about this. So, how you break it up, really important, because the pacing of a presentation is really important. One thing we talked about last week a lot is like the focus. And here in the Zoom world, the focus that you have on me right now, I am fully aware that we're still in the point where you are really paying attention, but we're going to hit a lull here at a certain point where it will start to dip down. And you have to really think about that and how you structure so that you have something that continually engages your audience. And so sometimes that's why if you get too bogged down in the methods or the results and you're just going on and on, you're going to lose some of your audience, if not all of your audience. So it's good to kind of keep those things, again, concise and precise. Next slide, please. All right, so let's start with the big question and the background information in this model. So you're going to see with each section, we're going to tell you that you're going to have goals for every section. So for your big question, you want to connect your audience to what the research that you've done, okay? And this is kind of the meta level, right, or the mega level. The big question, how your research really affects the person there in the audience. And so if you use a ton of jargon right there at the start, you're going to lose them pretty quickly. It's really important to connect it to a big issue that they are familiar with, that they can connect to. Because you got to think your audience, especially at Expo, you're going to have some people who may know a little bit about your research, but you're also going to get people who know nothing about your research. And you want them to be engaged right from the start. So connecting your research to a big idea, a big question that they can understand. So, I mean, if you think about different types of research, Say you're working on cancer research. So most people know someone who has had cancer or something. That's affected almost everyone. So if you can connect it to that, or, you know, not just a disease, maybe it's an environmental issue. Maybe it's a social justice issue, you know, maybe it's COVID-19. You know, that's a big question we're all dealing with right now. Maybe it's how to do a presentation in Zoom. Okay, big question. We're all connecting to that. So you connect them right at the start, and then you're going to build your argument from there by giving us some background information. Okay, and you're going to present your hypothesis or your thesis statement on that very first slide. Okay, so that people know, okay, this is the question you're asking. Here's how it connects to the world that I live in, and start your argument, okay? So in your approach there, as it says, you really only want to give the basic brass tacks at this point, you know, the essential information. Just like with a poster, you're going to have a desire to put everything on there because you've worked really hard, and we understand that. You're going to want to throw it all in there and show these great graphs, or, you know, the great data that you've collected, or, you know, this incredible amount of research that you've done. That's great, but you only have a certain amount of time, so you really need to have just what is essential to your presentation, okay? And as I said, your audience, yes, you can assume they're intelligent, they're in a college setting, they're going to have a certain level of understanding, but they aren't going to know all the jargon. So if you do need to have some essential jargon, make sure you explain what it is, okay, so that people understand that. All right, next slide, please. So with your hypothesis or your thesis, okay, so here we say provide a specific prediction that you will test against your data. You know, and in a humanities world, you know, you're asking a question, you're working on something that's brand new. Again, I've said it before, and I'll say it till my dying breath, you know, research is adding new knowledge to the world, right? And you're testing something. So maybe you've done a lot of research on a particular historical figure, and you're looking at it from a new perspective or a different lens. You are adding something new. So it's not just the STEM approach, okay? But you have said, okay, this is a question I want to ask. This is how I've answered it, okay? And I've had certain techniques that I've used. But you can kind of predict that a little bit, you know, with that question, because you can think, okay, yeah, first of all, you could say someone's going to be interested in this. This has value to the world, right? And that's one of the fun things as an aside, I love about being involved in undergraduate research is that you are coming at these ideas and thoughts from a completely new perspective. And that's one of the beautiful things about it, is that this is your approach, okay? This is your idea. Even though you're building on the knowledge that existed before, you're seeing it through your eyes and through your exploration. So you're going in a new direction. And that should be shown here. That makes it more interesting, makes it more exciting for the viewer, the audience. But as, you know, give a satisfactory answer. You want to be able to answer that. And maybe it's the total opposite of what you thought it was. Very often I've seen some people say, well, we tested this because we wanted to see if this did this with this kind of research or this kind of interaction. And then in your conclusions or through your results, you can say, but actually we found out that it didn't work the way we thought it would, but we can now test it in this way, and this is why it's still valuable. Okay, and that's still a satisfactory answer, right? Even though it may be different than what you thought was going to happen, you can still present it in this way that it's still satisfactory, and you're still adding knowledge to the world because you've tested something or you've created something new, that type of thing. All right, next slide, please. All right, so with your methods, okay, so again, you can do the tendency, you want to do a deep dive here, right? Because you're learning all these new techniques, or maybe you've done this incredible lit review, you know, you want to throw it all on there. But again, you don't want to overwhelm your audience there. Again, you only have so much time to present this information. So you really want to have enough detail there, but don't overwhelm them, okay? They need to have enough detail that helps them understand your results, but not so much that they're just overwhelmed. So keep it simple, all right? And keep it organized. So we're going to have a few interactive exercises here with some slides, and you can break down what's wrong with them and ways that you can improve them. But you can even see in this, there's a lot of information on these slides, but at the same time, we're trying to model how you should organize yours, right? There's a lot of stuff in here, and I'm sure you're reading ahead, as is our tendency when there's a lot of information on a slide, but it still is very simple, right? We just have a few basic bullet points, and that's what you should model. Again, don't assume your audience knows all the methods that you've used. If you have a lot of jargon in your methodology that can confuse the audience, make sure that if you have something that's really complex, that you do try to make it simple. I mean, I know that can be reductive, but again, the goal is to engage your audience, keep them engaged, and have them involved. So as part of this, of course, you need to be prepared to answer detailed questions as well. And we'll talk about answering questions a little bit here later, and it's okay to say, I don't know. We'll talk about that. That's totally fine. There's ways that you can answer that in such a way that it's still valuable. But again, if you put something on a slide, just like if you put it on a poster, you need to be able to address that. So don't just throw stuff up there because it looks nice and fancy. Make sure it's something that you are absolutely fluent in and that you can answer questions on. Because if you have a few experts in the room or people who get confused, they're going to ask you questions. So you need to be able to explain those methods. Next slide, please. All right, then you have your results, okay? So again, you just want to give us enough detail that we understand what your results are. And sometimes you can have a lot of results, sometimes you don't have a lot, but you don't want to overwhelm us. We want to be able to see the progression of, you know, you use these specific methods and then you had some very specific results with that. As we say here, 2 to 3 main points and limit the detail. If you go into, again, too much detail here, you're going to lose the audience. You want it to be focused on 2 to 3 main points. If you have more than that, I mean, if it's extremely valuable, again, these are suggestions. It's not like you have to sit there and meticulously adhere to what we're saying today. But again, this is tried and true. A lot of people that we worked on these slides with postdocs and with grad students, and they have a lot of experience with presenting, and they suggest a lot of these. Figures and graphs, okay? Those are really important visual images, and we're going to talk about that too. But again, make sure they are just really pertinent and specific to what you are presenting. Again, there's a tendency to throw up a lot of information when you may only need one part of that information to get the message across, okay? Especially with your results. You want to focus us down onto this very specific things that addressed your hypothesis and your thesis. We want to see as an audience how you've made that conclusion, okay? So keep those focused and minimized. Next slide. All right. So here's an example and some suggestions for a graph, okay? And you can see the size of this is really important. That's one of the best things about it, and the use of color. You know, if you use a slide and it's too small for people to read, it's useless. There's no point, even if it takes you too long to explain what it is. You want them to be able to see it. If it's a graph like this, that there's a clear axis, that everything is legible. The difference of color to help distinguish the 2 different lines, all those sorts of things, really important. Simple statistical information, don't throw everything out there. A key is very important if you do have different types of information. And a title, sometimes students forget to put a title for a graph or for their data. That helps us really guide the audience into specifically how to look at that piece of information. So a short, simple title that explains what is on that particular graph is important as well. So that gives you some good information there on using graphs. Next slide. All right. So now we're going to come into a participatory part. So we've given you some good information. We're going to have you look at the next slide. And these are some things we want you to think about when you're looking at this slide. All right. And then you can put in the chat 2 elements that you think should be improved. So again, you're looking at how the slide is structured, the layout of it, how color is used, looking at the fonts, how much text, the types of graphics, all those sorts of things. Really important. 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 Really the content, all of those sorts of things. All right, we'll just give you a few minutes to kind of go over. It probably won't even take you a couple minutes to see. You'll see exactly what's wrong with this slide when it comes up. But if you can go ahead and type in the chat things that you think could be improved. So let's go ahead and put up that slide there, Neelu. And if you can, be specific. So, for example, graphics or content. If you can break down a little bit, be specific about what's wrong with it or what could be improved. Fewer exclamation marks, absolutely. Excellent. Seeing lots of good stuff here. Good catch. Yep, the font doesn't match. It assumes that I don't know if flies have wings. Very good. Excellent. All right. So looking at all this stuff, I think we can pretty much say that this is a horrible slide, and that's okay. That's why we have it up here. But yeah, I mean, so much of what you point out is absolutely right. So the use of colors are horrible. There's no context. Really, there's no connective tissue, as we'd say. It's just worms should have wings. It's just this declaration. The pictures are okay, but they aren't that professional the way they're kind of laid out on the slide. Absolutely, the fonts are terrible. They're the wrong, this red on green. It's not even proper Christmas colors. It just, there's so many things that are wrong here. It doesn't explain anything. It doesn't really tell us. I mean, worms should have wings? Is that the hypothesis? Why? That type of thing. So there's not enough information. All sorts of things that are wrong with this. So great job. Excellent participation on there. All right, let's do the next one, Neelu. All right. Let's break down this one as well. Fantastic. All good stuff here. All right. Again, this is a fairly obviously horrible one, but I will say that, can you bring that back up, Neil? Went to the whole shebang. Even though this is so obvious, but students do make these mistakes. I will tell you that this is based on sometimes students do make these mistakes. Even grad students, postdocs, even faculty make these mistakes on occasion when they present information. There's no there's no context, absolutely. There's no key. Again, the title on the side just saying this is my data, not nearly enough information. It's hard to read. The color scheme is all messed up again. I mean, there's so much wrong with this. But I will say, again, you really have to consider when you use graphs and when you present your data that everything is explained well and it's simple and understandable. The font size is really important, the placement of the words, all of these things. And so it can be a real challenge. Sometimes you can have really complex graphs that you're trying to present, but and sometimes you can simplify it too much, right? Sometimes we can take away too much information so that we don't understand it. So there's a balance there. But this gives you just a baseline start of things that you need to have when you present a graph or data. All right, next slide. All right. So yes, we've been examining and critiquing all of these things from how the layout of the slide, the color, of course, the font size, how much text is used, the type of graphics, all those sorts of things. Let's go to the next slide there. All right. So let's give you some tips now. And a lot of these are intuitive, but again, it's good to think about these things, minimizing the clutter. And as we saw, especially on that second slide that you looked at, it was there's just so much, bad information there. So again, minimizing to the basic information that you need. If you aren't going to talk about it too, if it's not pertinent to what your thesis is, take it off because it's taking up space, the valuable space on a slide. So if it shouldn't be there, take it out. Steering the audience, and you can see that we did that on the slides before when we were breaking down the hourglass figure. We used color to highlight where we were talking about, all right? And it's this natural progression down through the hourglass. So it was organized in a way that steered you through the conversation, through what we were presenting. So anything that you can use to help guide the audience is valuable, to help them look at certain things. So color can help with that. The number of bullet points, the placement on the slide, all of those things are important to consider. Next slide, please. All right, so with color, we do have templates for PowerPoint. UAB has some great templates on the toolkit with University Relations, and we'll put that as a link for you here at the end. But that gives you a template and takes care of the basic colors for you. But again, every picture that you put on there, you want to consider the color. You want to think about color blindness. This is a real issue. So make sure that you aren't using colors that people who suffer from or have color blindness will have issues reading your information. The old, black on white contrast, or the light or the white on black, make sure you have that strong contrast. There's one group of students who work with a specific PI, and he has all of his students use a black background for all of their posters and all of their presentations. But it takes a lot of practice to be able to go with that. Sometimes it's easier if this is your first time designing a deck to go with the dark on light. Or you use the templates that are provided by UAB. But again, thinking about that high contrast, make sure it's legible, that people can read it. When you do use photographs, and again, you have some examples there, when you have text over those photographs, you need to make sure it's legible. So obviously the color of that. So sometimes you have to play around with that. Obviously, it's better to put the text above it or below it rather than having it on top as well. So that can eliminate that problem. But if for some reason, because of size or space that you have on your slide, you still want to consider if you're putting text on top of a picture. All right, next slide, please. So font size. So in the virtual world where we're going to be, everyone looking on their computer screens, you can see the different sizes here. And if it's at 12 point, even in the virtual world, that's going to be too small for me as a person with glasses. It's hard for people of my generation to be able to read that. So you can see in distinguishing between headings and all that, using proper font size is so important. Also the fonts, we talked earlier about that. You saw some horrible fonts. Use the sans serif fonts. Those are the ones we highly recommend. The most legible. Don't ever use fun fonts, as we saw in that one exercise. It absolutely makes it look unprofessional. So, and I talked about this before. I once judged a poster that was bright pink with cursive. And I've seen that with PowerPoint presentations as well. Again, simple and just well structured. With don't get fancy with the font. All right, you use the correct font, but make sure it's big enough for everyone to read as well. And the amount of information you have on there. If you can reduce the number of words, use bullet points. All those sorts of things are extremely valuable when you're presenting slides. And then you can make the font bigger and easier for people to read. Next slide. All right, so here are some other examples of two different types of graphs. And you can see the difference, how clear and simple the one is on the left. The very few words that are used, has a clear key. Much easier to understand, much clearer in purpose. So when you're choosing graphs, try to use as simple as possible. Because as it says here, it takes time for audiences to look at a more complex graph. And if they're taking their time trying to figure out what's on that graph, they aren't listening to what you're saying. Okay, so again, with a talk, a research talk, or an oral presentation, what you're saying, is you expanding on these slides. The slide is just the starting off point. You don't want them to be looking at that slide the whole time that you're trying to talk. You want them to be listening to what you're saying. So a simple graph is really important. Now, when you have a poster, you may be able to have a little bit more complex graph. But even then, it's still really good because you're going to have to walk people through that poster. And they're going to maybe be standing, 6-7 feet away. They need to be able to read it and understand it. So be very careful when you choose your graphs. Next slide. All right, so let's talk now about your language or how you are presenting yourself. Very often, students will have a very scripted speech. I highly recommend you don't do that. It's good to write something down and then practice it, but then put that away. Don't memorize it, okay? Because you want it to sound extemporaneous. You want it to sound natural, that you are so familiar with this material that you are just telling us a story about it, right? Rather than reading word for word off of it. Makes it more natural, makes it easier for the audience to engage. They won't fall asleep as easily, all those sorts of things. One way to really find a way to deal with this, of course, is to record yourself. And now in the world of Zoom or with PowerPoint, however you're going to do it, record yourself and see how many filler words you use. Count. Have a little clicker or have a little check mark. See how often you say us, likes, And of course, those are things that we fall into when we're nervous or we're not as familiar with the material. That we try to fill the air with these things. That's the way our brain works. It tries to fill the silence. It's okay to embrace a little bit of silence on occasion. It gives it more gravitas. It gives it more energy sometimes when you take a pause and then deliver the information. So finding out how many filler words you use, a few of them are okay, but it can be absolutely distracting. And I'm sure you've all seen presentations where people are constantly falling back on these. I'm sure I've used a few while I'm presenting today. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you are just so familiar with this material. So that's why you don't want to just read off of a script. Using your hands. Now, if you're in person, body language is super important, but it's also important even in this Zoom world, right? So practicing how you use your body language, how you're sitting in the picture. See how, if you're moving around a lot, you want it to be professional. So practice sitting straight, okay? How you sit. Make sure your camera is the right. We're going to talk a little bit more about these, but there's a real tendency when you are doing an in-person presentation to lean on the podium or a desk. Try to avoid that. Breathing. Okay, taking deep breaths. It's important. Take those pauses. As I said, it's okay to embrace a little bit of silence here and there. It allows the audience to catch up, to process some of the incredible information that you were delivering, all right? So it's important when you are recording yourself, again, to see how you breathe, because of course you're getting oxygen to your brain, you're going to deliver the information better, and it definitely forces you to slow down the information that you're delivering, because that's another tendency that when we get nervous, we start to talk really fast. It's important to try to slow that down so that you can really emphasize the most important elements of your presentation. So practice pausing, breathing, delivering information. If you watch a lot of TED Talks, you can see that people who present those, for the most part, are very good at this. They have minimal information up on the big screen. It really is about how they present themselves. And even though it is obviously a very practiced speech that they're delivering, the presentation style is extemporaneous. It shows that they are very comfortable with the material, that they have a relaxed approach with how they are relating to the audience. It takes away some of the nerves that they have, even though I'm sure those people are really nervous, and I know you'll be nervous. But one of the beautiful things, especially if you're presenting in the virtual world, you're going to be recording yourself and then uploading the presentation. So the ability to practice in this Zoom environment is really valuable. So really embrace this. I know there are a lot of negative things about the world that we're living in right now through this virtual environment, but there's also, it's a really good way to practice how you present yourself. So think about that when you're doing it. All right, next slide, please. All right, so here's an example of a simplified slide from the information that we got before. So we had those horrible slides, but now we see a much stronger presentation of that slide. It has a hypothesis, it has the question that they're asking, it has a model with a good graph with some nice images. So this is a huge improvement over what we saw before. Some beautiful, beautiful images there of flies and worms. This is not my research. It is some postdocs who created this slide, and they actually do this research, so it's quite interesting. All right, next slide, please. And now we see the example of the graph page. Tell you what, let's go back to the last one, Neelu. Let's take it just a couple minutes. I talked about some of the things that were better there, but let's get some feedback from you. I just saw that my artistic self is hurting now. She loves papyrus. Long live papyrus and Avatar. But yeah, let's take a couple minutes. Why don't you type in some things that you think they did improve on this slide versus the one that we saw before. You can still put some things that you think maybe could still be improved. Maybe there's even more that they should have done to improve it. It's totally fine. This isn't my slide. I'll give them feedback. But let's take a minute or two here to look at this slide, and then we'll look at the next one, just to kind of document things that you feel like they improved on. Excellent. Still a little dumb looking. Yeah, I think it still could be improved, absolutely. Improve on the models, definitely. I think that those are almost too simplified. I would agree with that. Yep, the hypothesis absolutely is much more clearly defined. Definitely much easier to look at, that is for sure. The context is much better, absolutely. All right. Well, Oh, excellent. Boy, people are still typing in. This is good. And Neelu has typed in, what do you think about the title? Any thoughts on that? Good response. Yeah, it's not that engaging, absolutely. And of course, my first question when I read it is, why do we want to give wings to worms? um, and that's not really addressed in the hypothesis as well. So, Neelu, did you want to comment as well, since you brought up that question?
I mean, I kind of get why they made the title, just because it's a good way to kind of be like, oh, wow, this is interesting. How could you do it? But like, I definitely get why people don't like it. I don't really like it either. I feel like there could have been a better way to say it, or maybe you could have just gone with hypothesis, since there was probably a slide before it that was already explaining all this.
Definitely. Excellent points. Yeah, maybe we'll make a note next time we do this presentation, might have people rework this title. Maybe people can think about how you would make this title better. So, all right, but let's move to the next slide, because I want to get some feedback on that one as well. So here's the one with the chart, the data, as well as more information. So let's break down this one as well versus the ones that we had before, which were horrible. You can see the numbers, absolutely. Excellent point. Title is better, absolutely. Great point. Organized well, definitely. Excellent point, Micah. I thought the same thing as well, that by putting the future directions on here, it's kind of combining both results and conclusions and future directions into one slide. I think they probably should have split this one up a little bit. Absolutely. And good observation on the title as well. It is easier to understand, but it could be, it doesn't need to necessarily be a statement. Excellent points. Perhaps it's something other than a bar graph. Good point. Hannah, excellent. Also reinforcing that, maybe splitting it up into different slides. Yes, Kiana, thank you for pointing out. The WG was on the previous slide, but it's not really explained here. So we don't have a key. We don't have an understand what WG is. Excellent point. So if they took off the future directions, they could put in what the WG is, right? So absolutely, I think this graph it's better, but there's still improvements that could be made. Absolutely. Excellent points. Wonderful interaction there. Thank you. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so you're getting ready to give your talk. As I said, don't write a script. It's okay to have an outline. You want to practice, practice, practice. Timing is important, absolutely. If you go over too long, especially in an in-person one, all right. If you're at an in-person expo or at a conference, and you go over your time limit, it can knock off the whole schedule. So from a professional standpoint, you need to stay in the time limit. Now, I will say we've all probably gone to conferences, and it happens at Expo too, where sometimes people will go over the time limit. We do have moderators who usually try to help with that. But it really is on you as the presenter to practice your presentation to a point where you know you can stay on time. So the number of slides that you develop, practice how much time you talk for each slide. Make sure you stay in that 10 to 12 minute range for the expo. Practice with other people, okay? So I know we're all in isolation right now, but we can still record it and share it with a friend, a family member, a dog. You want to have an audience that will respond to you. So practicing is so important. Get feedback from people. They can spot things that you do that you even have trouble spotting. So maybe there's you're looking away from the camera, for example, in a Zoom meeting. That's one thing that I've noticed a lot. I've already seen some articles on that, on how people react in a Zoom environment, right? So it's good to practice that because, again, you are engaging the audience. And if you don't know that you're doing things that are distracting, you're going to really hinder yourself in doing well. So get feedback from people who know your work. So if you're working in a lab, of course, your mentor, your fellow lab mates, peers that know that information, get feedback from them, but also from people who don't know anything about the research that you're presenting. You want to get feedback from multiple types of people. So something that your relative who doesn't know anything about the science that you're working on, or in my case, doesn't know anything about film, but they can still understand it. You want to get that sort of feedback. And have confidence. So this is something I like to tell students all the time, is that you are the expert in that room. Even though there may be people in that room who have a PhD and have done tons of research, for this particular research, it's your research. Be confident in that. If you've practiced it enough and you've done the research, you should be able to present it, and you are the expert in that room on that research. So go in there with that confidence. That's really important to remind yourself that this is your research. You are the person that has conducted it. You've put together this great presentation. You've practiced it. Now you are ready to either record it and get responses or to present it in person. So rock it. Go out there and do your very best. And I'm sure that you're going to make huge waves with the incredible research that you're doing. All right, next slide, please. All right, so a quick summary of all the lovely things that we've talked about. And one thing, I always emphasize that when you're presenting your research, it's a narrative. It's a story that you're telling. And so treat it in that way. You're not just delivering facts or just data. You need to engage the audience. So approach it, that hourglass approach helps you kind of structure it that way so that it kind of separates the information into different sections and helps you form that story. Okay. The slides, they need to be simple. They need to be aesthetically pleasing. They don't need to be cluttered. They don't need to have too much information. You want to, again, they are the jumping off point for you to expand on and give all the great information that you have. As I said, it's your information. Be confident in that. If you practice and practice and practice, you're going to be comfortable in that research. You have lived it, you've breathed it, and now you're recording it or you're presenting it in person. But you are the expert in that room. Always remind yourself that. Next slide. So again, sometimes it's good to sketch out your presentations ahead of time. That's one good way to also kind of help you design your graphs. It helps to have a quick sketch of what your whole process is going to be. Then you can develop your graphs even stronger if you have a good sketch of that. Next slide. All right, and as you're critiquing and receiving criticism of your presentation, always think about how much information you're giving. Is it too much? Is it too little? Have I explained all of the jargon that's specific to my discipline? Are people going to understand it? Is it organized well? Again, that hourglass technique is a great way to organize your presentation. So use that as a way. So when you self-critique, when you have other people critique you, you can give them this as a way to kind of give you back that information that you need. Next slide. All right, so presenting virtually. Neelu, you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about this, and I can also chime in?
Yeah. So, sorry. To start off, audio. Make sure that when you're presenting virtually that your audio is working, because if you're talking but we can't hear you clearly, then that's going to be a major issue. Like if most of what you're saying is important and you said it great, but we can barely hear you, then that's pretty disappointing. So another point is if you can be seen. So if while you're presenting, we can actually see you, first look at the setting. This basically would be like, make sure that the lighting, first of all, that there's not too much light behind you, but there's a lot of light in front of you. The reason I say that is because when there's light in front of you, we can see you clearly, but when there's light behind you, it looks like you're in darkness. So it just looks really dark. Another thing is dress appropriately. So even if it's a virtual presentation, we can still see you and we still expect you to like dress as you should in an actual expo. So when you would actually present in front of us.
Can I chime in here just real quick? It gives you more confidence too. I always tell students this, that when you dress to succeed, you feel like you're more professional because you are more professional. So that's something, even in this virtual world, it's really important to think about that if people can see you.
Mm-hmm. Another point is look at the camera when you're talking, because no matter what you're looking at, what the judges or what the audience sees is on their screen. But when you look directly at the camera, it looks like you're looking at the audience. So it just seems a lot more like you're reaching out to them more. Another point is, make sure to check your background. Make sure that you can see what's going on behind you and that there isn't any problems, or make sure to check the ambience. So like there isn't a lot of loud noises or a lot of random noises that could go on in the middle of your presentation. So another thing that we can do is stand. You don't have to, but like when you're standing, even if they can't see you, it gives you a lot more confidence and it can make you feel a lot more comfortable while giving your presentation. Yeah, and it's a pretty helpful thing to do. And also to the audience, when they see you standing, it's a lot easier to like focus on you. And another thing that we've talked about before is to record your presentation. When you record your presentation, you can see the mistakes you made. You can see what you want to change. You can see what you like and don't like about it. So if you record it a few times, then you can be like, oh, these are the things I like that I did. These are the things that I want to change. And it's just a good way to set it up. So, any more questions?
All right. Yeah, we got a few minutes left here for questions. You can put them in the chat if you'd like, or you can definitely speak up. We're happy to answer any questions on presenting in person or virtually, or if you have any specific questions about the expo, we're happy to address those at this point. Also, as a quick reminder, you can see that we are recording this, so we will be uploading this along with all of our other workshops from this summer to our YouTube page for the Office of Service Learning and Undergraduate Research. So if you need to reference back to any of the slides that we've used, it'll be available on that YouTube channel. So if you need to go back and look at the hourglass structure. That's where that will be. I'm also happy to send you directly the slides if you would prefer that. Again, you can email me at ghjones@uab.edu, and I'm happy to send those to you directly. Any questions at this point? All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. It was a pleasure to interact with you on this Wednesday. We look forward to seeing you at our Summer Expo or in the Fall Expo. So thank you for your attention. I hope you've got some good information from this. Please feel free to contact us if you have any questions. But otherwise, we'll just say goodbye and see you. We do have one more workshop next week. I'll be talking about personal statements and getting ready for grad school, so that we have one more next week, and then we're done for the summer. All right. Thanks again, everyone.